Classical Conversations presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today, my guest is Pastor Doug Wilson. Pastor Doug has been a pastor of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho for over 40 years. He is an author and speaker and is well known for his writings on classical Christian education. Personal note, he definitely helped inspire my mom to start classical conversations. He also talks about Reformed theology and general cultural commentary, which everyone loves, and why he's a dearly beloved pastor by everyone in the world. He is married to his wife, Nancy. They have 3 children, 18 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Wow.
And a third great-grand on the way.
And a third on the way. I've had the pleasure of communing with all of you on a Saturday night before Sunday church. And so I think I've seen at least half of them at some point. But Doug, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and how you all got started in Moscow, Idaho.
Sure. I've been the pastor of Christ Church since 1977. I got out of the Navy. My folks moved here in 1971, right after I graduated from high school. I helped them move and then settled here for a few months, and then I went in the Navy. And then after my stint in the Navy, I came here to go to school. I thought, well, I could just declare residency anywhere. And so I thought I'll catch up with my folks, do my college, and then the plan was to go on and do literature ministry like my dad was doing, open a Christian bookstore somewhere. That was the plan. And so I majored in philosophy, and shortly into that, the Jesus People type church that had started up here in Moscow that I was a song leader for lost its pastor and didn't have anybody for the next week. So I preached the next week, and one thing led to another. And so the long-suffering saints of that little fellowship, now called Christ Church, have been dealing with me as their pastor since 77, roughly.
Wow.
And so I finished school, and things began to reform and develop. And in 1980, we started Logos School because one day my wife turned to me and said, our oldest daughter, Becca, was a toddler. And Nancy said, Doug, I can't see handing her over to someone we don't know and saying, here she is, educator, teach her about everything. And I knew virtually nothing about Christian education at the time, but I knew I agreed with that. And so I somewhat rashly told Nancy, well, don't worry, we'll have a Christian school started by the time Becca hits kindergarten. I don't think we had even heard of homeschooling at that time. That was 19.
Still illegal.
Well, yeah, actually it was.
Still legal.
Yeah, it was. In the early years, there was an arrest down in southern Idaho, and it was still kind of somewhat tenuous, but we hadn't even heard of it. So we were just looking for a Christian alternative, and so Logos School started in 1980. I was one of the founding board members, and I remembered reading an essay by Dorothy Sayers when I was in the Navy, and we rummaged around and found that essay and decided to build what we were doing on her observations, because we didn't know anybody, we didn't know what we were doing. But God was very kind to us, because Sayers' approach was brilliant, and it began to have stupendous results almost right away. And we thought, my goodness. And as the years went by, we just got more and more into what we were doing. So when I first started in education, I was not an educator at that time. I was simply a concerned parent. I was simply an involved parent. I didn't want my kids to get the kind of education that I had gotten. And so all 3 of our kids went through Logos, and all 18 of our grandchildren, those of school age, have gone through. Most of them are through now, but we're still well represented throughout Logos.
Yeah, I know that similar story to my mom of finding Dorothy Sayers. But then one of the books, so Classical Conversations was started in 1997. And you had a book that was released that was instrumental in her thinking, Repairing the Ruins in 1996. And I believe we still sell it at classicalconversationsbooks.com and host that. But like, as you were learning these things, like what was going through your mind on helping others achieve these kind of these wins that you were seeing locally?
Yeah. So what happened was the first 10 years, we were just learning what we were doing and keeping our heads above water and trying to pay the bills and doing all the ordinary stuff. And then I belonged to the conservative book club at the time. And because this was pre-internet, so I would get book catalogs and that sort of thing. And one day I got a book called The Turning Point by Herbert Schlossberg, who wrote the magnificent Idols for Destruction, and Marvin Olasky. And it was very clear to me that this was the first in a series of biblical worldview books. This was probably 1990, 89 or 90. And during the 80s, I had learned a great deal from the Reconstructionists, the Rushdoony, North, Bonson, those guys. But I couldn't, because of some quirkiness or angularities in what they were doing, I couldn't pass their books out. I was learning a great deal, but as a pastor, I couldn't commend everything. And, it was, and then this book, The Turning Point, it looked to me like this was this is going to sound pejorative, but it looked like Reconstruction light, or biblical worldview thinking that was being applied without the like it or lump it approach that characterized some of the Reconstructionists. And I thought, oh, this looks like it's going to be a series. I'd like to write the book on education. So we were 10 years in, and I contacted Marvin Olasky, who was the editor of the series. Turns out that was correct. And I was traveling to Florida for some event. And I think on the way home, I stopped in Austin, Texas, and the Olaskys put me up, and I pitched the idea of Logos School being the basis for the book on education. Long story short, I got the contract to do that in the Turning Point series. Well, the Turning Point series was, they had books on literature and books on going to the movies and books on foreign policy and banking. But when you read the Turning Point book on the movies, you'd put the book down and say, honey, let's go to the movies and enjoy the movie with a Christian worldview perspective. When you finished my book, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, what happened was people put the book down and said, we have to start a school. And then they would write us or call us. And we were basically, I was just talking about how God had blessed us, but that made us sort of experts. And so we started getting, there was a really great response to this. And so the volume of mail and contacts got to the point where, it was sort of overwhelming to us at the time. We didn't have the infrastructure for it. And so I handed the pile of correspondence to Nancy and said, could you please handle all the education correspondence? And so that was the beginning of ACCS, Association of Classical and Christian Schools, on our kitchen table with Nancy handling that. And then I had the bright idea. I said, well, let's hold a conference and call it the Repairing the Ruins. And what we can do is we can tape the talks, and the talks will address FAQs, frequently asked questions. So instead of answering all these letters by onesie twosies, we could have these tapes. We could have a conference, record the talks, address the questions, and then just hand the tapes off and say, here you go. At the time, it was tapes, not
right.
This is pre-Cambrian, actual tape in the tape players, and we got a really amazing response. A bunch of people came to the first one here in Moscow, and I thought, by the time of the second one, I had drawn up the papers for the Association of Classical and Christian Schools, and that took off. So basically, ACCS began as a self-defense move of
Yeah, you got to educate your kids.
How can we manage all these questions? And then one thing led to another. And God was very, very, very kind.
Yes. And not only did you inspire, I mean, how many ACCS schools are there now? I mean, there's hundreds, thousands.
I think 400.
Yeah. You're not in the day-to-day.
Yeah.
You gave that to someone else to deal with.
That's right.
What made you all, because in the 90s or the 80s, education wasn't that bad, at least compared to today. So what made Nancy reach out to you or say, we need to do something different? Like, what were y'all seeing then that the rest of Christianity was ignoring?
Yes, I think this was another area where I think God was kind to us. I don't think we were fully aware of the worldview component, right? The how hazardous the secular aspect of it would be. We were aware of it because Nancy said to me, I don't want to hand our child over and say, teach her about God and everything. That was a player, but probably the motivating thing for me was the slipshod nature of the education that I had received. I didn't want my kids to be educated that poorly. Going through high school, I was not made to work the way I ought to have been made to work. And I would say the front burner concern for me was the academics. I wanted a strong education. The worldview component was part of it. And around the same time, I had been working with some of Francis Schaeffer's materials. We were sponsoring his How Shall We Then Live and Whatever Happened to the Human Race. We were sponsoring those sorts of events on the campus of the University of Idaho. So I was being introduced to Christian worldview thinking at the time, but was still in second grade when it came to all of that. So I was involved as a parent, primarily academically, but secondarily, I wanted our kids to have a biblical worldview, but I didn't know the magnitude of the stakes. It was, of course, you always know heaven and hell are big stakes, but
yes.
I did not have in mind the craziness of our current clown world. That was not on the horizon.
Well, I think that's a good segue, into my next question, because we do live in a clown world, and we've seen where we were kind of a Christian culture, and all these people were going to churches, and now we see that something around 85% of kids that go to church but are in public school end up walking away from the faith within just a couple of years of getting out of the house, or at least no longer doing those type of things. And so you're considered a polarizing figure among Christian leaders. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
It has been brought to my attention.
I get at least half a dozen letters a year from concerned parents about Doug Wilson, but you've seemed to be right about a lot of things, by the grace of God over the last 40 years. So is it intentional? Is it unintentional? Is it you're trying to get, more out there? Or are you just thinking that you're going to speak the truth and the truth is controversial?
Yeah. So it has been intentional. I mentioned in the 70s, late 70s, and then when we were first starting Logos, that I was sort of a newbie when it came to Christian worldview thinking. But
right.
by the mid 80s, I was more or less up to speed, I think, on what was going on and what the root presuppositional issues were. And then I remember that we began publishing a magazine called Credenda Agenda in 1988. And I remember deciding in 1988 who I was writing for. When I'm writing my pieces, magazine articles, books, and now when I'm blogging, I've stayed with this ideal audience that I'm writing for since 1988. And that audience is basically this guy. He or she are evangelicals They are distressed at all the things they see happening around them, including in their own church.
Mm.
They can't quite articulate what's wrong with it, but they know that something is wrong with it. And
Yeah.
what I want to do is write in such a way that someone in that position reads what I write, and they say, "That's it. That's what's bugging me." I want to put a voice or articulate for that person why they're uneasy with all the crazy that's happening all around them. Now, what that has meant, practically speaking, is that the way, and this is getting to your polarization question, what this has meant is that the people for whom I'm writing, the things I write are a great comfort or a reassurance to them. I thought they were being gaslit by our current culture, and what I write and what came into their home has been sort of a lifeline. Oh, I'm not crazy. The world's going crazy. I'm not crazy. There's someone else out there who sees this. So for that person, what I write is a great reassurance. Okay. For the people who are on the opposite side of the polarization, they are people frequently who they're good. They love God, and they're going to heaven when they die. And your polarization question had to do with polarization within the Christian church. All right.
Sure.
So sometimes it's because my fans are not my best friends in the, their past. They come up to their pastor after every other sermon and say, that's not what Doug Wilson says. Okay. So I understand why there are good pastors out there who don't like the sound of my name. That happens. But there's another aspect to it too. There are a lot of Christians who think that this is just a fit or a frenzy and that it's somehow going to go away. This is a phase that our culture is going through, and everything's going to return to normal sort of by itself. Why do we have to be so combative? Why do we have to be so polemical?
Because that's happened in history before.
No, and that's why people need to read a book. This is things don't write this sort of capsizing of the ship. It will not right itself. So what's happened? So right now, if I were to articulate my views on marriage, that marriage is between a man and a woman for life, and that is the only thing that we should recognize as marriage. All right, that's my position. Civilly, that's the only thing in that our society should recognize as marriage. That is considered currently to be something of a hate crime or bigoted, vile, evil hate crime. But that was the position that Hillary Clinton ran for president on. That was the position that Barack Obama ran for president. What is marriage? He would answer the question, unlike Jackson. Apparently Clinton and Obama were both biologists.
Yeah.
So they had the same definition of marriage. So what this means is just within the last decade or decade and a half, the Overton window has moved that far left.
Right.
Okay. So what used to be something Obama or Clinton could say, Christians are now accused of the highest forms of bigotry if they try to say. Now the next thing helps explain why some Christian leaders are uncomfortable with some of my rhetoric or some of my polemical engagements. The Overton window cannot be moved. I should define that perhaps. The Overton window is the realm of acceptable discourse, things that you can say in public. So it used to be and not get run out of town. And the Overton window has been moving steadily left for the last generation. That Overton window is on coasters. It's on rollers. It's moving steadily left. And I am convinced that the Overton window cannot be moved back in the right direction. Again, the Overton window cannot be moved from inside the window. All right.
Yeah, you have to get outside of it and yank it. Right? That's what they were doing.
Correct. The Archimedean point is not inside the window, because that's like standing in a bucket and trying to carry yourself upstairs. You can't do it. You need a purchase point or a point outside what's going on. And so consequently, if you take a stand and critique what's going on from outside the Overton window, you're outside the realm of polite discourse. You're an outlaw, right? And so by definition, but the only way you can move the window back where it ought to be is by being willing to be that kind of an outlaw. So the thing that some people think is, they'll say, well, Wilson's too combative or he's too polemical or whatever. Well, I don't talk to my wife that way. Don't talk to the grandkids that way. This is when a man picks up a weapon for the battlefield, he uses it there. He doesn't take it home and shoot out the dining room lights with, with it.
He's protecting the dining room.
Correct. You're not fighting because you love to hate. You're fighting because you love what's behind you. You're defending something. And I think that has to be the demeanor of every Christian culture warrior. But you also have to be willing to be misunderstood. You have to be willing to be misrepresented. And that's something I came to terms with back in the 80s.
Hey everyone, I want to briefly interrupt this program to tell you about one of our newest Copper Lodge Library releases, Pride and Prejudice. It is a resource that our families read in the Challenge program. Our Classical Conversations multimedia company has produced this new Copper Lodge edition of this beloved, beautiful book that so many of us love and enjoy. Me not being one of those as a teenage male, not my favorite one that my mom required me to read, but as an adult, I definitely appreciate the story much more. And it's a beloved classic novel. And the wonderful thing about the Copper Lodge Library books is it has footnotes that include, definitions, pronunciations, historical context, and really just helps bring the story to life, as well as wide margins so that students can take notes and really have that conversation with the author. And I bet I would have enjoyed these books much more as a teenage male had I had these details provided for me in the books that I was reading. So students will be discussing Pride and Prejudice inside of our Classical Conversations communities. And of course, for those who might not be in CC, it's a wonderful book that you should include in every curriculum. So you can learn more about the Copper Lodge Library series at copperlodgelibrary.com and go to classicalconversationsbooks.com to purchase one today. Now back to the show. So one of the things that we always talk about in business is define your audience. And you've defined that 1988. So you haven't changed that audience in almost 40 years, 36 years.
Correct.
And so that's quite impressive. And then, that idea of if you're in the Overton window and you're pretty comfortable, you kind of get uncomfortable that someone's telling you that your stance is inaccurate. So no, I appreciate that clarification and what your role is in Christendom. One of the things that I thought about to get you in trouble is to be obedient to God. Do you believe that parents must do all they can to give their kids a Christian education?
Yes.
And will that be a controversial statement? And should that be a controversial statement inside of churches?
Yeah, I can understand why that was controversial back when we started. There were school districts in East Tennessee where the superintendent was a Christian, all the teachers were Christian, they all went to the local Southern Baptist church, and they ignored the state board of education. Right? You had well, I have to go back to the 19th century when the first large waves of Catholic immigrants started to come to the United States. One of the reasons why the Catholic parochial school system was built was they objected to the government school system, but their objection was that the government school system was too evangelical and Protestant. So the government school system used the Protestant Bible, and it was Protestant prayers, and it was even Protestant catechisms. And so in the 19th century, when R.L. Dabney was writing against secularized education, he said famously, in the 19th century, Christians then must prepare themselves for the following results. All Bibles, catechisms, and prayers will ultimately be driven out of the schools. And we look at that statement and we say, there were catechisms in the schools.
Yeah.
Yes, there were not only catechisms, but they were evangelical Protestant catechisms, so decidedly Protestant that the Catholics built an alternative parochial school system because the government schools were so evangelical. But the intellectual leadership behind the whole public school movement, Horace Mann, for example, that thinking was Unitarian. So the bad guys were playing the long game. Local school districts were controlled by evangelical Protestants, but the organizers of the system as a whole had dirty deeds in mind, which certain people like A.A. Hodge and R.L. Dabney saw and identified. But down into, I'm not that old, and I still remember praying the school day in government schools, opening with prayer. I still remember that. Don't remember any catechisms, and I don't remember any Bible readings, but I remember the prayers. So in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the Christians who were fighting to restore prayer to schools or to get that sort of thing back in, they still thought of the government schools as somehow their inheritance, their legacy, their birthright, which a century before that was accurate enough. But that ceased to be the case within the last lifetime, within the last generation. And so reforming groups like Focus on the Family and that sort of thing, they were stalwart in trying to equip Christian parents to fight for a Christianized or at least an education that was not hostile to their Christian faith in the public schools. But things have gone off a cliff in the last few years, such that I don't think it is debatable anymore whether or not Christian parents have the responsibility to keep their kids away from that. Basically, things with the transsexual business, with the drugs administered by the school nurse, with the CRT being taught in the public schools, it's just one wicked thing after another. And so now, I do want to say one thing. There are some cases I've dealt with as a pastor where you've got a nasty divorce and one of the spouses has left the faith, and you've got a single mom in your church, and the kids have to go to the public school through court because of a court order, right? So I don't want to say that it's a sin if your kids are in the government school system. People like that should have our sympathy and support, and we should do whatever we can. But where parents have a choice, all right, I believe that it is morally obligatory to provide your children with a Christian education and not with a secular, militantly secular education.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always those situations that are heartbreaking and that you can't really control. But even in those situations, okay, church, if it's ordered by that, what can we do to get around these kids and get around these families in this court order type situation? And, a lot of people say, I can't afford to homeschool, but I see they go on vacation twice a year to the Bahamas. And I know they just bought a brand new car and, 7,000 square foot house. I'm like, well, you can't afford to homeschool. You just choose not to live that lifestyle. Or you could choose to send your kids to a Christian private school, but you just don't want to live that lifestyle. And
right. So one of the things we've done in our church is we have a deacons fund to help Christians who've fallen on hard times, or husband someone's laid up medically. We have a deacons fund. We also have a subset of that deacons fund, which is a Christian education fund, which means that we don't want any child in our congregation to not receive a Christian education because of money.
Right.
So basically, I don't want to introduce another thing, but we're a Paedo-Baptist congregation. We're Presbyterian. And whenever a child is baptized, the parents take covenantal oaths to bring up the child, the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And then we turn to the congregation and say, do you commit yourselves to help these parents in the Christian nurture of this child? If so, signify that by saying amen. And the whole congregation says amen. And that means we are covenantally bound to make sure that that child does not go without a Christian education because of some detail like money.
Yeah, we do the same thing in our church, and I don't know if it's always true with everyone coming in. I think our average age of our church is about 9, and maybe getting younger every Sunday because we have about 8 women pregnant right now.
Yeah, we're in a similar boat. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think a single student in our church goes to public school on a regular basis. I mean, there might be some kids that are in there for a year or something for another reason, but I'm pretty confident, 99% of them are in some sort of Christian education. And, I really think I would love to see people say a healthy church is ensuring that their children are getting a Christian education.
Yeah, we're in the same position. We're in the same position where we have hundreds of school-aged children, and none of them are in the government school system.
I was going to say, I know this because I've been up there, but you actually have public schools shutting down because there's not enough schools for them, and y'all don't have school choice, aka government funding of Christian education. Y'all have managed to do that, and so that is amazing. Now, you recently were on Tucker Carlson show, so I'm going to say people should go watch that. So I don't want to talk about it too much, but Christian nationalism's been in the news. You said that you prefer to be called a Christian nationalist versus what other people have called you in the past. Right. I consider myself more of a sympathetic to the Christian nationalism idea or Christian nationalism adjacent. But what does that really mean? Because I think especially that term nationalism, people think there's historical connotations to that are bad.
Yeah.
So what is Christian nationalism really in your mind? And watch the Tucker Carlson episode for the full answer.
Yes. On the one hand, my son likes to describe himself as a Christian intergalacticalist.
Yeah.
Christ's claims are total. And nationalism does have bad connotations because, of course, groups like the Nazis, that was a National Socialist Party.
Far left, not far right, far left people.
Correct. It was socialist on a national scale. And when people hear nationalist, a lot of people think of dictators with mirrored sunglasses and missile parades and goose-stepping armies. And that's what nationalism means to them. A lot of this began with a really fine book by Yoram Hazony called The Virtue of Nationalism. And basically, human beings can organize themselves in 3 basic ways. There could be tribalism, which is what you have in a failed state like Somalia, or
like the Native Americans, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. Or some kind of Thunderdome setting where you've got rampaging warlords and different tribes and groups. You've got radically decentralized states of anarchy. If you had anarchy, then soon you would have tribes and warlords. So that's tribalism. On the other end would be globalism, right? I don't want to live in a failed state with rampaging tribes. And I don't want a globalist order where I have to eat my bugs and people in Belgium are telling me how far I can drive for my summer vacation. I don't want the globalist elites running the show. And the world is currently configured into nation states. We have a nation now. So I'm a Christian and I'm an American. Okay, I'm a Christian and I love my nation. So how can I put these two things together? Okay. Now, what I mean by Christian nationalist is I would like, as an American citizen, for our nation to stop making God angry.
Yeah.
That's all I mean. So I believe that thank God for the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe, but we still have the Obergefell decision, which is trying to sanctify sodomy and call sodomite unions marriages, which they aren't. It's same-sex marriage. And we are doing numerous things like that make God angry. And I believe that we have a responsibility to repent and believe, to turn away from our national sins and call upon the name of the Lord. So, in doing that, there's no way for me to articulate our corporate duty to turn back to God without being called a Christian nationalist. That's and like I joked with Tucker, I prefer that to being called a white supremacist or a theo-fascist or the other names that they come up with. There is no way for a Christian to articulate in the public square his view that we need to return to Christian values or return to a Christian consensus, which built this country, without being labeled a Christian nationalist. It doesn't matter what you do. That's what you're going to be called. And so because I believe I can explain it in a few minutes, I'm willing to roll with that.
No, that makes sense. I mean, if you have those three options, tribalism, nationalism, or globalism, and you've got to pick one of those three in order to articulate it well, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, ultimately, that doesn't happen through government power. That happens by evangelizing our neighbors and them committing their hearts to Christ and then adopting a biblical worldview and then voting for people, hopefully, who have those biblical worldviews that implement laws and things like that. So Donald Trump will not be, unfortunately, saving us in November, no matter how many votes he wins by.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Well, Doug, what new books are you working on, or where can people connect with you?
Okay, let me answer the second question first. I blog at dougwills.com, and the name of the blog is Blog and Mayblog. And we structured it such that the first page you go to, if you open up the first page, pretty much everything I'm involved with is there on the front page somehow, some way. New St. Andrews College, Canon Press, Logos School, ACCS, our denomination, CREC. There's a link to pretty much everywhere at dougwills.com. The book I'm working on right now is called Malthusian Antichrist. Antichrist, and it's my book on economics and environmentalism and the Christian response to it. I think the whole green movement and the anti-people movement is simply a resurgent Gnosticism that is at war with God's design of this planet and people to live on it, lots of people to live on it.
Yeah, the degrowth movement and those things that are adjacent to it of wanting to make it so there's less humans is definitely contrary to God's will. And yeah, the green movement is the way that they're trying to implement it, it seems. So it's been successful with the secularists, but not the Christians. So as long as we can keep those families growing,
keep making babies,
and get them to have a biblical worldview through Christian education, we win the future. And of course, we know how the book ends regardless. So, Doug, thank you so much for being on my show today. It was an illuminating conversation, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode with Doug Wilson. If you want to learn more about classical Christian education, I would encourage you to go to classicalconversationsbooks.com and pick up Classical Christian Education Made Approachable. And that's a great book, about 100 pages, easy read to really get you started on your classical Christian education journey, help you look for good schools or good homeschool curriculum in the future for your kids. And of course, our challenge program is a great place to have discussions just like the one Doug and I had today. In the meantime, be sure to share this episode with a friend, subscribe on YouTube, follow me on X, The Robert B. Show, and until next time, God bless.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.